Thanks for clicking on Wayne.com for this week's edition of Inside the Zone, Week 2, where we find out what we knew, what we didn't know, and what we thought we knew that we didn't know. Man, Week 1 is in the books. What's your biggest takeaway from Week 1? Because I think we misjudged some teams, as we are wont to when you're judging 14 to 18-year-olds.
Yes.
I think we misjudged some teams from the get-go.
I think we did, and on a flip, though, I think we need to be careful that we don't take any too sweeping judgments on teams out of 1 week. So I think that's the reaction. I think we're all, that's our nature is one game we're going to make snap judgments on teams. Let's wait a couple weeks before we really settle in and see where everybody kind of slots in.
That's where they pay us the big dollars for these hot takes.
Yeah, just wait.
Stephen A. Smith style. Now, I want to ask you this before we dive into the Week 2 slate of games. Who impressed you the most? What was your biggest impression from a team that you saw where you looked at it after the games were over and said, wow, okay.
Yeah, it's a little out of the area, but what Warsaw did to Michigan City and beating them by 28, and that's a top 5, at least preseason, Michigan City team in 5A. And for Warsaw to be able to dominate the way they were able to, now they get Chesterton this week, another fringe-ranked team. We don't really pay too much attention to the Northern Lakes until we get close to the playoffs, right? And, it's a sectional 2 with Carroll in there. So I'm saying Warsaw. I'm saying Norwell going down to Mississinewa getting a win is an underrated victory. I think kind of flew under the radar as well. So those two teams in particular stood out to me.
I was going to say Bishop Dwenger because I think we kind of take what they have for granted. And they always graduate a bunch of guys. But, Mr. Campbell coming in, stepping in at quarterback. C.J. Davis, turned the game on a dime in the first quarter with an interception and an 88-yard touchdown run. A lot of people talking Carroll, a lot of people talking Snyder, but, man, maybe we should have been talking about the Saints a little bit more, because I do still think that Wayne is going to be a good football team when the season is all said and done. Let's talk about the SAC because, again, it's already the second week of conference play when you're talking about the SAC, and there's no game bigger in the area than Snyder at Carroll. Both of those teams had big games last week. But, man, this feels like championship week in Week 2 to a certain degree. Not counting out Homestead, not counting out Dwenger, not counting out any other teams.
Right.
But it feels like this is really, really going to set the tone early.
It's huge. And, in talking to Coach Tippmann after that Snyder game and really kind of looking at this is, you take it week by week, but these first 2 weeks are very pivotal for Snyder. You face an upstart Northside team wants to make a point. You handle your business, late, you execute when you need to, hold on to the football, grind out yards, move the chains. It's ugly, but it is effective. And now you have Week 2, first home game of the year for Carroll. And can Snyder go in there, elevate their game a little bit? And then conversely, Carroll very impressive, but now the challenge gets greater. The defense is going to be challenged a little bit more. And Jimmy Sullivan at quarterback's going to have to cut down on the mistakes a little bit. Really good, 234 yards, 3 touchdowns, also threw a couple picks. Now all of a sudden he's facing probably the best defense he'll face other than his own all regular season long.
Yeah, I was there for the first half at Lures, and it took Carroll. It looked like a Carroll team that was trying to figure some things out. You saw they had the talent. It was funny when you looked up at the scoreboard and it was 0-0 midway through the second quarter, because I was like, I feel like Carroll should have scored by now. But as you mentioned, Jimmy Sullivan, they're working in a new quarterback. It just felt like they took a little while to get on the same page. But obviously in the second half, they put it together. How do they take it a step further? As you mentioned, they're facing a better defense this week in Snyder, maybe the best defense in the area.
Well, I'm talking to Carroll before the season started and said, our defense is going to have to lead us early on as we get settled offensively. And I think we saw that at Lures Field last Friday. Is they're still working out the kinks, and it's probably just not going to be a 1-week thing. But they do have to take a step forward if they're going to be able to beat Snyder this week, because, God love Bishop Lures, they just lost too much. They're trying to find themselves, right? So you felt pretty good once Carroll started getting going, but, Dylan Bennett, Jorge Valdez, those guys defensively, Braden Steely, those are going to be the keys, I think, for this team coming up this weekend on Friday night to face Snyder and really limit the Panthers, because I got to say, other than the running game with Langston Level, I wasn't overly impressed with what Snyder did on Friday. I thought they'd come out and really go downfield a little bit more. And, game planning and all that, they kind of kept it a little bit close to the chest. I think they're going to have to open up things a little bit more against Carroll on Friday night.
Yeah, and maybe that's just a week one thing. But
oh, sure, yeah.
Because
absolutely.
you do have Hopper at quarterback. I mean,
Yeah.
you have guys, Kamari Juarez at the wideout position. You have guys that can game break it in the passing game. If it comes down to one thing this week for this game, what do you think it's going to be? It's going to be our highlight zone game of the week. If there's one thing this game hinges upon, what is it to you?
Well, I'm going back to quarterback play. We talked about Jimmy Sullivan, his first big test as a varsity starter coming up on Friday night. And then what do we see for Snyder? I mean, we see Luke Hoppert is obviously QB1, but we saw Kieran Billingsley worked in there for a couple series last Friday, just did give them a different look. So do we see more of that in terms of Billingsley to kind of get an added look out of the Wildcat? And obviously Hoppert's ability, I think he's going to have to make some more throws than what they had to do against Northside. So I'm going down and saying quarterback play is going to decide this one.
Bishop Dwenger at Northside, another key SAC matchup. Northside obviously needs a win if they want to stay in the SAC title hunt. Bishop Dwenger can ill afford a loss when you look at Carroll and you look at Snyder and the way that they've played early in the season. So what's going to be the key in this one? Because this has turned into a little bit of a rivalry game. We've had some really good games, whether it's been the postseason or the regular season over the last few years between these two.
Right. Last year, what was it, 10-7, 17-10, something in the playoffs between these two teams. Bishop Dwenger getting a close win then before they beat Snyder a week later. But, this is all about turning the page. So you talked about Sam Campbell and Bishop Dwenger, and very impressive week one. Everybody was trending going Wayne and watch out for Wayne going to Shields Field. And Bishop Dwenger took care of business. Now they have to turn the page because it's a greater challenge for playing Northside now at Chambers Field. Conversely, Northside needs to move away from last Friday. I think last year, that last second loss, week one, really set the tone in a lot of ways for the season. And they really couldn't get off, the slide after that week one. They need to put that out of their minds, move forward, because it doesn't get any easier this week against Bishop Dwenger. They have an opportunity to get a win, and like you said, back on track, only one loss, you're still in the SAC race, but if you start off 0-2, then it really starts steamrolling, especially with the schedule that Northside has.
Yeah, Homestead at Concordia. Both teams looked pretty good at times in week one. I don't know how much we found out about Homestead.
Yeah.
They completely ended up outmanning Northrop in that game. And then Concordia, we found out Johnny Washington can play football.
Who knew?
And is a pretty darn good athlete.
Yeah, a little bit.
Three touchdown receptions in the first half. So how do you see this one playing out, and what are your early impressions of both of these teams? Because both were impressive in their own right in week one.
Impressive with Homestead. It's one of those teams that we look at and say, just because they lost some guys to graduation doesn't mean they're going to replace it with production. They have so many bodies out at Homestead. It's really much plug and play, and there's a lot of talent out there. And then Concordia was really surprising offensively to me. You mentioned Johnny Washington, 3 catches, all go for touchdowns. I think Eli Maddox is one of the most underrated players in the entire area. I think he may be the most complete quarterback in the SAC that we've seen. And I think in talking to a couple people over the weekend, they said, Concordia, they're not going to be towards the pointing into the standings of the SAC at the end of the year, but they're going to put a couple scares into some teams and maybe knock off one that people think is going to be competing for an SAC title. So keep an eye on Concordia. As long as they stay healthy, not much depth there. But with that offense in particular, it's pretty deadly.
What I was impressed with, you got Rusher. I mean, the guy, Hayward, guys, and obviously Bubba Craig on the offensive line, but guys that look like college football players.
Yeah, right.
So you got a couple of guys on the pass rush. They got it in the backfield against Southside. Now it's going to be a different story, perhaps against Homestead. But they had some guys that looked like big-time football players.
Yeah,
so
they did.
Tim Manigle's got... Tim Manigault might have a better season than some suspected at the beginning.
I agree, and it's only going to help him once you get in 3A playoffs, right?
Absolutely. East Side at Adams Central in week 2. You're talking about this was one of the best games we saw all of last season. These teams are vastly different than the teams we saw last season, but both teams kind of came out. Both teams put up 50 points in week 1, and both looked pretty impressive considering the situations in week 1.
Yeah, both of them basically said we're not going anywhere, right? I mean, you look at Eastside, Briar Muncie. We are talking about Dax Holman. Briar Muncie goes for over 200 yards rushing. And you looked at Holman goes for over 100 yards. And Carson Jacobs runs all over the place at the quarterback position. So through 1 week, you're feeling pretty good if you're an Eastside Blazer fan and saying Laban Davis who. I don't think you're ever going to say that in Butler. But,
I know what you're saying. I know what
You know
you're
what I'm
saying.
saying.
I know what you're saying.
But it was a good, first game post Laban Davis era, and the same thing with Adams Central, and they go up, and we thought maybe that game would be close for a little bit, and it was not at all against Garrett. So this is really a great game. I think, despite it not having any ramifications on conference championships or anything, great barometer game for both teams. Potentially for Adams Central, their biggest barometer game of the season. I mean, potentially, they get Covenant Christian next week. So either this week or next week, or South Adams.
Yeah, when you take a look at Adams Central, I mean, this could be a statement game early in the season. You mentioned that their schedule certainly isn't easy, but this could be one of those games where you look back and if they play really well, beating a good East Side team, and you say, we should have known it. We should have known it. And when we saw them in week 2.
We opened this with not jumping to conclusions about a team, but through 1 week, I'm putting Adams Central as the best team in the North in Class 1A.
Yeah.
At this point. I mean, I think I came into the season thinking that, and I'm like, somebody's going to have to disprove it. Through 48 minutes of football, they've lived up to the billing. Now, can they continue to do it? I think we're going to find out a lot about both teams on Friday.
And the thing I like about it, they did it on defense, they did it on special teams, they did it on offense. So really, they had all 3 facets of the game really working. And I know Michael Mosier working. He always downplays. He always does it. You know they're going to be good.
Well, we lost a lot, and maybe the guys can come together. And you're just shaking your head at Michael Mosier. God love him.
They're going to be all right. We'll be down there at the landing strip this week. Now let's talk a little bit about Heritage at Norwell, because you did mention early on the win against Mississinewa on the road is a better win than I think most people in the area would give credit to. So how do you see this playing out? Game 1 at the Courtyard. There are expectations for this Norwell football team this year.
There absolutely is. And first game at home, and there's a lot of hype around this team in Aussie and in the surrounding area and the bustling metropolis of Uniondale. And I feel like, Heritage, they kind of want to go out and prove a point, and at the very least, hang around in this game, make it a game into the second half, because we look at the Patriots and say maybe they could be that third best team and maybe challenge an Adams County team in the ACAC. So I think this is for Heritage maybe a bigger game for them than how Norwell's going to look at it, but we'll see if the Patriots can hang around for a bit.
Leo at Angola, Garrett at DeKalb, also some games we're going to be shooting on the highlight zone. What are your takeaways from them? Because Leo hung with Kokomo until the third quarter, and then they broke open that one 60-yard touchdown run, and then Kokomo was off and running after halftime. And Angola picked up a nice win against DeKalb. I would have selected the Barons to win, because I'm kind of high on the Barons this season with Overbay and with Irk and with all the guys that they have coming back. And now Garrett has to figure some things out, because we thought they were going to be put up a bigger fight against Adams Central last week than they did.
Yeah, a lot of question marks in that group of teams that we talked about. And you look at Angola, and a great win to start off the season. Semi-new stadium, obviously, with the turf and all the renovations there, and that's a good win. And now you look at Leo, and you look at the schedule, and you're playing after this. You have Norwell, East Noble, New Haven consecutively, and you're going, you better win this week, right? Or it really could start steamrolling. So I think what we saw with Leo that not a lot of people appreciated is when you change things so drastically as what Jason Dorfler did, and you're taking away a scheme that the kids ran for years and years and years.
In middle school.
Before they even touch a varsity snap on Friday night, you're reteaching everything. And that comfort factor of what you ran for the longest time is thrown out, and everybody, whether you're a senior or a sixth grader, is new to the system. And I think we saw some mistakes out of Leo on Friday night that we traditionally don't see them make, but I think that's growing pains. But they don't have much time to figure it out, because it's Angola and then arguably the 3 toughest teams in the NE8.
All right. So heading into week 2, what are you most looking forward to? Obviously, as you mentioned, we got our first impressions, we got our knee-jerk reactions, hopefully out of the way.
Right.
Now, I feel like once you get in 2 to 3 games, you get a bigger, plus the scrimmage, you get a little bit more of a sample size of what we actually have.
Yeah. Well, especially in the SAC, because we're jumping right into conference play week 1, right? So this week we have Dwenger North and we have Snyder Carroll. So that's further going to allow us at the top end of the standings to see who kind of slots in where here earlier in the season. So that's kind of what I have eyes on, because can Northside bounce back? Can DeWenger keep it up? Can Snyder keep it up? Can Carroll keep it up? Those are the questions coming into week 2. And then once we get into week 3, we'll start talking about conference play in the rest of the leagues.
All right. He's Justin Kenny. I'm Glenn Marini, and we'll see you next week. We'll be talking week 3 football.
How about that?
Next Monday here on Inside the Zone.